The United States is the largest economy in the world, a financial powerhouse that dominates global markets, controls the world's reserve currency, and sets the rules for international trade. But behind the strength, behind the influence, there's a hidden reality. The U.S. doesn't sustain itself through industry alone. It doesn't rely just on innovation or entrepreneurship. It finances itself through a complex web of debt, taxation, and monetary influence, one that affects not just Americans, but the entire world. How does the U.S. government pay for its massive spending? Why is the national debt reaching levels never seen before? And how does America use its financial power to extract wealth from other countries? To understand, we need to go deep into how the system works, the real mechanics behind U.S. finance, taxation, and global dominance. And it all starts with the money itself. The U.S. dollar, the engine of American power. Most countries have their own currency, but the U.S. dollar is different. It's not just the national currency of America, it's the global reserve currency. Governments, corporations, and central banks all over the world hold U.S. dollars because it's seen as the safest, most reliable store of value. Oil is priced in dollars. Global trade is settled in dollars. Even countries that don't trust the U.S. still rely on its currency. This gives America a unique advantage. It can print money, and other nations absorb the impact. When the U.S. government needs more cash, it doesn't have to produce more goods or generate more exports. It can simply issue more debt, and because the world needs dollars, it will always find buyers. But here's the problem. The U.S. is addicted to borrowing. Decade after decade, America has spent far more than it collects in taxes. To cover the difference, it takes on debt. Massive debt. And right now, that debt is at historic levels. The U.S. national debt, a financial time bomb as of today, the U.S. national debt is over $34 trillion, a number so massive that it's hard to even comprehend. For perspective, if you stacked $34 trillion bills, it would reach the moon and back multiple times. Every year, the U.S. government spends more money than it takes in. Where does all that money go? 1. Military spending, more than the next 10 countries combined. 2. Social programs, Medicare, Social Security, food assistance. 3. Interest on the debt, which is now one of the government's biggest expenses, and every time there's a shortfall, more debt is added. But here's the real danger. Debt doesn't stay cheap forever. As interest rates rise, America is now paying more just to service its debt than it does on national defense. So what happens next? How does the U.S. plan to deal with its growing debt problem? That's where taxation comes in. The United States does not live within its means. It spends more than it collects, borrows more than it can pay back, and prints more money whenever it needs to. But someone has to foot the bill. That's where taxation comes in. For the average American, taxes are an unavoidable burden. A chunk of every paycheck, rising costs, and complex loopholes only the wealthy seem to understand. But what most people don't realize is that the U.S. tax system isn't just about funding government programs. It's a mechanism of control. It determines who holds power, who accumulates wealth, and who bears the cost of America's financial decisions. So who really pays? Is the tax burden fairly distributed? And how does the U.S. use its economic power to impose financial costs on other nations? Let's break it down. The U.S. tax system, who pays and who doesn't. Every year, the U.S. government collects trillions of dollars in taxes. But taxation in America does not affect everyone equally. There are three main sources of tax revenue. 1. Individual income taxes, paid by workers and households. 2. Corporate taxes, paid by businesses. 3. Payroll taxes, taken directly from wages to fund Social Security and Medicare. But here's the issue. Despite making record profits, major U.S. corporations often pay little to no federal income tax. Thanks to loopholes, deductions, and offshore tax havens, many of the richest companies in the world legally avoid paying billions. Meanwhile, the burden falls heavily on the middle class and small businesses. The top 1% of earners do pay a large share of total tax revenue, but many billionaires use legal tax strategies to avoid paying at the same rate as average workers. And for lower-income Americans? Many struggle under rising payroll taxes, property taxes, and hidden costs in everyday goods and services. It's a system that often benefits those who know how to game it, while placing the weight on those who don't. But the U.S. tax system doesn't just affect Americans. It extends far beyond U.S. borders, because one of the most powerful tools America has is its ability to impose financial pressure on other nations. The U.S. dollar as a global tax. How America extracts wealth from other countries. Most people think of taxes as something paid by citizens to their own governments. But what if a country could tax the entire world? That's exactly what the United States does through the global dominance of the dollar. Since the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, countries around the world need dollars for trade, investments, and international transactions. This means that when the US prints more dollars, other countries absorb the inflation. And when the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, the impact isn't just felt in America, it causes financial strain across the world. For decades, the US has used this power to its advantage. 1. Sanctions on rival nations, freezing assets and limiting access to the dollar system. 2. Economic pressure on allies, forcing countries to comply with US financial policies. 3. Debt manipulation. Developing nations borrow in dollars, but when rates rise, repayment becomes impossible. And the biggest example? China and Europe. Despite being economic powerhouses, they are still deeply connected to US financial policy. The US has imposed tariffs, sanctions, and financial controls that directly impact their ability to compete. And every time the Federal Reserve makes a move, the global economy reacts. It's a system that keeps America at the center of global finance. But at what cost? Because while this system has kept the US in power for decades, it is starting to show cracks. For decades, the United States has maintained financial dominance over the global economy. It has financed its massive spending through debt, extracted wealth through taxation, and leveraged its control over the US dollar to influence the entire world. But here's the reality. This system is not invincible. Right now, cracks are forming. The national debt is spiraling out of control. The global reliance on the dollar is weakening. And some of the largest economies in the world are looking for a way out. What happens if this system collapses? What if the world stops trusting the US dollar? And what if the debt-fueled machine that has powered the American economy finally reaches its breaking point? This isn't just speculation, it's already starting to happen. And today, we're going to uncover the greatest risks to US financial dominance and what could happen if the world moves away from the dollar. The hidden cost of printing money. Why the US can't stop. One of the most powerful tools in the US financial system is the ability to print money. Whenever there's a financial crisis, a government shutdown, or a debt ceiling debate, the Federal Reserve steps in and prints more dollars. This creates an illusion of stability. It keeps the economy running, prevents financial panic, and allows government spending to continue. But there's a cost. Every time more money is printed, the value of existing dollars decreases. At first, the effects are slow. Prices rise, but most people don't notice. Wages go up, but purchasing power stays the same. But over time, the impact becomes unavoidable. Inflation surges. Basic goods become more expensive. And savings, the wealth of everyday people, begin to lose value. We've already seen this happen. In 2020 and 2021, the US printed more money than ever before, flooding the system with trillions of dollars. The result? 1. Massive inflation that hit food, housing, and energy prices. 2. Rising interest rates that made debt more expensive. 3. Global instability, as other countries struggle to deal with the ripple effect. And the worst part, once the money is printed, it never goes back. The US economy has become dependent on constant money creation. It's a cycle: spend, borrow, print, repeat. But what happens when the world starts losing faith in the system? The global shift away from the US dollar. For decades, the US dollar has been the foundation of global trade. Countries needed dollars to buy oil, settle international transactions, and store wealth. But that's changing. Right now, major economic powers like China, Russia, and even some European nations are exploring ways to reduce their dependence on the dollar. 1. China is pushing for the yuan to be used in global trade. 2. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are working on a new financial system outside of US control. 3. Some oil-producing nations are beginning to accept payments in currencies other than the dollar. This is a direct threat to America's financial dominance. If fewer countries need dollars, the US loses one of its biggest advantages: its ability to export inflation to the rest of the world. And once that happens, the US may no longer be able to finance its debt so easily. What happens if the US loses financial control? If confidence in the US dollar declines, the effects could be devastating. 1. Higher borrowing costs. The government would have to pay more interest just to finance its debt. 2. Weaker purchasing power. The dollar's value would drop, making imports more expensive. 3. Economic instability. Investors would start looking for safer alternatives, causing stock market volatility. And the worst-case scenario? If the U.S. loses its ability to finance itself through debt and dollar dominance, it could lead to a financial crisis, unlike anything we've seen before. Some experts even warn of a debt spiral, where the U.S. has to borrow more just to pay off old debts, causing inflation to surge even higher. This isn't just speculation, it's a pattern we've seen in history. From ancient empires to modern superpowers, every dominant economy eventually faces a turning point. The question is, how close is the U.S. to its own financial reckoning? And more importantly, how can people protect themselves before it's too late? The future of U.S. financial power. The U.S. has built one of the most powerful financial systems in history, but no system lasts forever. Debt is rising. Trust in the dollar is weakening. Global competitors are looking for alternatives. So what happens next? Will the U.S. continue to print its way out of financial trouble? Will new global currencies challenge America's economic dominance? Or will we see a major shift in the world financial order, one where the U.S. is no longer at the center? One thing is certain. The decisions being made today will shape the global economy for decades to come. And whether you're in the U.S. or anywhere else in the world, this is a story that will affect all of us. Like and subscribe for more deep dives into the financial world, global markets, and the future of money. Do you think the U.S. financial system is sustainable, or are we headed for a major crisis? Let's discuss in the comments.